Times have certainly changed in Glasgow. Times have also certainly changed for disabled people.
In the past, if you had a visible disability, you were kept in a place where all disabled people could be kept out of sight.
In 1783, a man named John Dawson of Bath invented the Bath wheelchair, which became the best-selling wheelchair of the 19th century.
Just a small 190 years later, a lady named Moira Close opened a site called Havanteg in London. This was the first accessible housing which allowed independent living for its disabled residents.
That's progress.
Most disabled people don't mind admitting they need a little help. But the help we would like is to allow us to live independently. Something most people take for granted. And it is a basic human right.
Okay, I'd like to talk about Glasgow Disability Alliance's manifesto for action for an independent living strategy for Glasgow, and in particular about one of the 15 rights for independent living that are contained in that manifesto, the right for disabled people to have fully accessible housing. For us, as a disabled persons organisation, it's really important that we listen to disabled people and get their views as to what they think are the main issues and concerns that need to be addressed by policymakers, government, Scottish Government and so on. And when we do any surveys of our membership or when we consult with disabled people, the issue of accessible housing always comes up very high in the list, and it's maybe not surprising because we know there are thousands of disabled people in Glasgow and across Scotland, in fact, who are having to live in accommodation which is completely unsuited to their needs. And the requirement for accessible housing, the demand for it clearly outstrips the supply, and we know from speaking to our members that many people are having to live with the consequences of staying in accommodation that clearly is not suited to them. And I'm sure the group will have a number of examples of how inaccessible housing and how housing that doesn't meet people's needs has an impact on the quality of people's lives. It is really fundamental, the right to having an accessible house. If you can't wash yourself properly, can't feed yourself properly, can't get out your door, then some of the other rights really just become completely hypothetical. We talk about the right to access to education, employment and so on. Well, if you can't even get out your door, that becomes really almost kind of just something to dream about rather than a reality. Something people forget as well is that the issue of the lack of accessible housing means that for many disabled people you can't even go and visit your other friends and people who you want to socialise with because their houses are also inaccessible. So it's not just an issue that affects people in terms of their own individual housing, it affects people's ability to have the normal social engagement which other people take for granted. So you'll see in the manifesto we make a call for a huge increase in the amount of accessible housing. It isn't actually that expensive to make housing more accessible and to provide adaptations, and it's something that I think we campaign for until we see some real improvement.
We surveyed our own Activate group. 75% of our group did not have a home that fully satisfies their needs.
Of that 75%, 89% needed help to access their property, and 78% needed accessible washing facilities.
This means that at least 50% of the group we surveyed need both.
But this is only the start of the problem.
In Glasgow, there were estimated to be 102,000 disabled people, over 17% of the population. By 2013, only 3,233 homes had been adapted within social housing, according to the Scottish Government.
Scotland as a whole have 129,000 homes which need a adaptation. This is 5% of the total housing stock.
300,000 people, disabled people, are stuck on housing waiting lists across Great Britain. 75% say that their home lacks an accessible front door. 65% say their home lacks a bathroom large enough to fit a wheelchair.
Have a look at some poorly designed homes. These are all homes of disabled people.
How do I wash if I can't get into my bathroom?
How do I get back up if the toilet is too low?
How would you climb 2 steps in a wheelchair?
The adaptations you see now are basic and inexpensive, but give a disabled person their human rights back.
The average wheelchair is 24 to 27 inches wide from wheel to wheel. Darren's wheelchair is 26.5 inches wide. Linda's wheelchair is 23 inches wide.
Accessibility experts state that doorways should be between 32 to 36.5 inches to allow for wheelchair access.
Linda's doors have been widened to 33 inches.
Taking a sample of Glasgow Housing Association, very few accessible homes exist. These homes are generally in new builds. The other adapted homes include lowered units, widened doors, and walk-in showers. Although these are not standard, there are no general rules.
Glasgow Housing Association admits to not having specifically accessible properties. They have mobility properties, and they are allocated to whoever has waited the longest. We asked a housing officer about the criteria for a mobility property. He said there are no guidelines. He simply selects a property as mobility as long as it's not too hilly, has less than 3 steps to the front door, and is on the ground floor.
He also advised, without prompt, that they have no obligation to adapt any properties.
We also spoke with 2 Glasgow Housing Association tenants who were given properties with ramps, which they didn't need. So the ramps were removed and Glasgow City Council picked up the tab for disposal.
Glasgow Housing Association have around 1,500 homes. Of these, only one is a medically adapted home and a handful are classed as mobility homes. They have a yearly budget for adaptations, which is mostly spent on showers and automatic doors. In order to apply for an adapted home, people must have a medical form and doctor's letter.
Glasgow West has around 1,500 homes too. And of these, only a few are wheelchair accessible properties, which are classified as adapted with walk-in showers and grab rails.
We spoke to David Mitchell Maintenance, who provide adaptation for homes around Scotland. They told us their main adaptations are bathrooms. But adaptations for ramps and handrails for access are carried out less often.
An article in The Guardian has shown that falls in the home leading to hip fractures cost the state £726 million. The average cost of treating a hip fracture is £28,655, which is 5 times the average cost of housing adaptations and 100 times the cost of fitting grab rails.
The cost of adapting a home at the point of a building would be around £1,600 in comparison to adapting a standard home, which would be around £10,000.
The solutions we promote to combat these problems are as follows.
The first solution is for social landlords to commit to having more accessible properties and to sign up to Homes to Fit organisation to allow the right properties to go to the right people. If housing associations are willing to stop using their outdated technologies, like Home Finder, and stop giving homes with adaptations to people who don't need them, then the unnecessary and astronomical cost of removing adaptations could be avoided and put to better use.
Home to Fit is basically a database which works a bit like a dating site that looks at accessible housing for disabled people and it matches that with disabled people in housing need. And GCIL set up that database in 2014, and since then we've worked in partnership with over 30 housing providers to match vacant accessible properties with disabled people that really need them. Primarily it's about matching wheelchair users with wheelchair accessible accommodation because that's where the biggest issues are. And so far we've rehoused probably over 120 people using Home to Fit. The system's funded by Scottish Government and Glasgow City Council, and we're aiming to make it a Scotland-wide system, so it'll be a slow roll-out across the whole of Scotland. The main thing is to raise awareness with disabled people themselves. The system exists, but also with housing providers, because unless the two groups both use the system, then it won't actually work as a matching system. So that's what we're trying to do at the moment. I think the important thing to mention is that it covers not just social rented properties, housing associations and council properties. It also covers properties for sale which have been adapted. So if a disabled person has an adapted property and wishes to sell it to another disabled person, then it's one way of doing that, and it's probably the only system at the moment in Scotland that actually covers social rented and private sector adapted properties. So that's what we're trying to do at GCIL at the moment, to address some of the housing issues faced by disabled people, and also help housing providers, because quite often if they come to GCIL they'll say, we have an adapted 2-bedroom wheelchair house, we can't find anybody that really needs it. So it's a sort of clearing house, if you like. It helps housing providers when they can't find someone to find a disabled person that really needs the property, as opposed to ripping out the adaptations, which happens all too often, and that money that's been invested in the adaptations is then wasted. So I think it's a system which helps to ensure disabled people are housed appropriately, helps to use investment properly in adaptations and accessible housing, but also helps to decrease things like bed blocking and delayed discharge, because if we're using adapted and accessible housing properly, then disabled people don't get stuck in hospital unnecessarily or are forced into nursing homes or residential care homes due to lack of accessible housing, making the whole system work more efficiently and more effectively. And so far, so good, as they say. In terms of homelessness for disabled people, it's a major issue. Some people feel that homelessness is about being roofless, as in you don't have a roof over your head. It's actually about far more than that. If you think about it, a disabled person who cannot access essential facilities in their home because their toilet, for example, is upstairs, they're actually technically homeless. So disabled people are definitely underrepresented in the homelessness statistics. I think that local authorities need to do far more to identify disabled people that are homeless in their area and provide accommodation to meet their needs, and that's short-term temporary accommodation, but also longer-term settled accommodation. And I think that's something that most local authorities are not addressing adequately at the moment.
Second part of our solution is universal design, also referred to as barrier-free universal design, was coined by architect Ronald L. Mace in his short life. Properties of universal design are ordinary houses and flats which include a number of minimum agreed standards to ensure they are fully accessible.
This would end the confusion between the terms adapted, mobility, medically adapted and accessible, as they mean different things to different housing associations and property builders.
Mobility increases because basic access is a given. In cash-strapped times, it's important to realise that access isn't a luxury.
Disabled people are still marginalised, excluded and oppressed by mainstream society, and this is nowhere so in your face as it is when it comes to housing.
Disabled people are no longer willing to have their human rights overlooked. Is this you? Are you ready to have your voice heard?
Many more homes could be made accessible. The government needs to be more accountable in the provision of accessible homes.
So it does.
We hope you will all join us in solidarity to make barrier-free homes in Scotland a reality. Please sign our petition, and thanks for listening.